Welcome back! This will be the last of the intermediate time skip chapters. A few more scenes and a summary for some characters that I'll just give you now. Sasuke is almost identical to where he was at the beginning of Shippuden skill-wise. An argument can be made that he's overall a little weaker, since he isn't quite as gone as he was in canon. And there are examples in Shippuden where more negative emotions directly translate to more power for Sasuke. I'm going to be nice and say that isn't the case here. Or if it is, it's not that noticeable. He still hates Itachi, it's just not the only thing he's feeling. Hinata is better at medical ninjutsu but worse in taijutsu. The Hyuga have been refining their taijutsu style since as far back as they can remember. And in this scenario, it's a lot harder for Hinata to progress in the Gentle Fist since there is nobody to teach her. Anything she discovers, she would have to come up with on her own. And I don't think it's realistic that she can reinvent her family's taijutsu to a point where it's superior to the standard Hyuga one. Again, an argument can be made for her learning to use more offensive medical jutsus from Kabuto, but I just don't buy it. Yes, Kabuto's techniques can damage internal organs, but the Gentle Fist can do that too. The Gentle Fist is a lot more than just shutting down chakra points. Remember how Hinata's heart nearly stopped after her fight with Neji in the Chunin exams? And that was before he was really trying to kill her. Also, Hinata here has enough confidence that she no longer feels she has something to prove. She's not a frontline combatant and she doesn't want to be. There is one thing she does get, and that's a summoning contract. Specifically one that is given to her by Sasuke. The Nineko, or Ninja Cats. It's never stated that they have any sort of summoning contract, but they are ninja animals. All the others have a contract, why not them? And from what little we see of the Ninja Cats, they are somewhat closely affiliated with the Uchiha clan. Sasuke knows several of them by name and acts respectful whenever they interact. If such a contract exists, I think it's within the realm of believability that Sasuke can get his hands on it. Sasuke already has the Snake and Hawk summons, so he doesn't really need one more. And I think if the cats aren't as suitable for combat, kind of in the same tier as Kakashi's dog summons. So Sasuke wouldn't be as interested in them. But they are clever and resourceful. This is mostly just insurance that Hinata will have some allies and better chances of surviving on her own in case anything happened to him. I'm not sure if it will ever come up for the plot, to be honest. It's mostly just another sign of how much Sasuke values Hinata that he's willing to give her a summoning contract that would have traditionally, and this is just my headcanon, have belonged to the Uchiha. Also, I want to make it clear that even if Hinata had spent every waking moment training herself in combat, she'd still be absolutely nothing compared to Sasuke. That's just kind of the nature and setup of this setting. Sakura and Hinata don't have the same potential that Naruto and Sasuke have. I know that the whole reincarnation thing isn't a popular plot point, but while I'm willing to deviate the story from canon, the initial setup, the pieces that are on the board at the start, those I tend to leave, minus some details when I feel they're needed or unneeded. Or I'd have to feel really strongly about it. So yeah, heads up, that's all still a thing. And it makes it hard for Hinata and Sakura to ever measure up to their partners. And between Sakura and Hinata, Sakura is really the only one who's even still trying at this point. Speaking of Sakura, she gets all of the skills that she got from Tsunade in canon, plus all the genjutsu stuff that she figured out on her own. Also, I haven't yet gotten into her lessons with Danzo. Well, there is a reason for that, beyond me simply forgetting to include it before. About a week before Danzo had scheduled Sakura's first lesson, she showed up at his office with Tsunade. She was dressed in her Chunin uniform. I've decided not to take the remedial lessons, sir. Explain yourself. I learned in a letter from Naruto what happened in her first lesson, and I want no part of it. You think you should have spared that criminal Gato? Or that I should have spared him? Not at all. I can't say that what you did is wrong. All I'm saying is that I want no part of it. Danzo hadn't planned to have any one-on-one sessions with Sakura as he did with Naruto. He just didn't consider Sakura important enough to be worth the time investment. Instead, he had planned to give her some missions that would bring her in direct contact with the ugliest parts of the world, which would require a ruthless hand to solve. She'd be accompanied by several older ninjas to guide her in this, and talk her into and through those missions. Now it seemed that all those plans were going down the drain. Sakura may not be as important as Naruto, but she might still wield a lot of influence in the future. Haruno-san, do recall that while Naruto Uzumaki volunteered for her lessons, for you they were a punishment. You can't just decide not to take them. Sakura looked to Tsunade for moral support, and got a small nod in return. I remember what you said. You said I'd have to take those lessons, or you wouldn't ever trust me to lead another mission again, and I'd have to hand in my tuning title. Sakura removed her tuning vest and laid it out on Danzo's desk. Well, here it is. It was Naruto that cared about her career as a ninja. Sakura had been having second thoughts ever since the tuning exams. Knowing what Danzo considered the true merit of a kunoichi, Sakura was even more pushed away from this path. Sakura didn't care about her ninja career. She just cared about helping Naruto, and she didn't need a fancy title or rank to accomplish that. There was a lot Danzo wanted to say, but none of it would improve the situation for him. So instead he plastered on his best fake smile while suppressing the desire to throttle the girl in front of him. Get out of my office, Getty. And she did. Getting back to Naruto and her troubles, well, she had no clue how to deal with the Ninetales dilemma. She now felt the QB was well within his rights to deny her access to his power. Except Danzo wouldn't let her not use it. She truly had no idea on how to proceed. So she forgot about it for the time being and threw everything she had in just training herself. Working herself to the bone was traditionally how she handled frustration. I, in this story, have frequently mentioned that Naruto is a genius/prodigy, just like Ken and Naruto if we're being honest. And that's just not idle words. Enter scene. One day, near the tail end of her training trip, Naruto again approached the QB. Ninetales! Kurama approached, not saying anything. He still despised Naruto, but he also knew that he only retained his free will at her sufferance, placing him in a very precarious position.
What is it?
I've come to bargain.
Are you mocking me? All I have you can just take.
Shut up and hear my terms. I will enter your cage here and now and fight you.
You think if you prove yourself strong I'd willingly work for you?
If so, she was wrong. No, I expect nothing of you except this. If you kill me, you swear not to harm any other humans, and leave the elemental nations forever. Get as far, far away from the Akatsuki as possible. Kurama was understandably surprised.
What are you planning?
I have gotten to the point where I can reliably best Jiraiya in a spar, but that isn't enough. Jiraiya admitted he's nothing compared to my father, and that's what I need to measure myself to. And so I need to fight stronger opponents. Naruto grinned viciously, though it was mostly a front to hide how nervous she was. You're it. And besides, the memory of you nearly killing me still haunts me. I still fear you. This is how I face my fears. However, while I'll risk my own life, I won't risk anyone else's. Hence, I need your word that if you kill me and break free, you won't harm anyone else. Naruto had already written a farewell and apology letter to Sakura in case this went poorly. Kurama could hardly believe what he was hearing.
Foolish woman.
Because at this point, Naruto couldn't be called a little girl anymore.
You believe because you spared me from the genjutsu I'll take it easy on you?
On the contrary, I fully expect you to try and kill me. I'm counting on it. Jiraiya loves me, and so he'll never truly go all out against me. You are different. Kurama felt hope well up inside him. Still, it was testament to how much he hated humans that he actually had to consider Naruto's bargain of him not harming any other humans. But the promise of a chance at freedom eventually won out.
I accept your terms. Upon my honor, enter this cage, and should you perish, no others will be harmed unless they attack me first.
Naruto took a deep breath, and Kurama knew what came next. While Naruto had recently taken an effort to hide some of her training from him, and now he understood why, Kurama still had a general idea of where she was taking her abilities. After deciding she wasn't going to use his powers, her goal to obtain strength as well as who her sensei was led to one logical conclusion. Naruto's bright blue eyes grew orange with flat horizontal toad-like slits in them. Considering that her real body was sitting still outside, she'd be able to gather all the nature energy she'd need without worrying about running out. It was doubtful that their battle would go on for long enough that it would exhaust the natural energy in the environment. Naruto might call herself a perfect sage, but Kurama wasn't impressed. He'd known other sages, Hashirama, and especially his father Hagoromo. Compared to those, this little sage was so weak it was almost comical. Naruto's ponytail started to wave, though there was no wind. Not natural one at any rate. She crouched down as if she was about to do a 100-meter dash, and some other strands of her hair wrapped themselves around the metal bars of his cage. What she was doing, this fight, was incredibly foolish. But that foolishness did give him the chance to finally obtain his freedom, and she had spared him from being enslaved by Genjutsu. For those two reasons, Kurama decided he was going to remember her fondly after he killed her. Naruto used her hair and the metal bars they were grabbing to slingshot herself towards him, and he charged to meet her. The water on the floor splashed to the side due to the turbulence created from Naruto moving so fast over the ground. Kurama knew that there was a chance she might be faster than him, and she'd certainly be more maneuverable. That was the advantage of being smaller. But there were advantages to being large as well. When they were close, he let his belly nearly glide over the floor, making it impossible for her to move under him. His two front paws tried to envelop her. She wouldn't be able to dodge to the side. He opened his mouth, preparing to either swallow her whole or bite her in two in case she tried to meet him head on. Naruto's eyes widened, indicating that Kurama had correctly guessed that her strategy involved getting behind him somehow. Her elongated hair was still gripping the metal bars of the cage behind her, and she used that leverage to halt her charge, and pull her back faster than what would normally be possible. Still, she was fleeing from him now, and so there was only one thing for Kurama to do at this point. Chase down his prey. Less than 2 seconds and he was already winning. She had truly been a fool to think herself his equal. Even as she was being pulled back by her hair, which by that point were as long as Kurama's tails, she was gathering chakra in her hands. It spun to a thin plate, and she threw it at him. Rasen Shuriken! The moment Kurama realized what she was doing, he had started to gather chakra for his own tail beast bomb to counter it. He knew he'd win any confrontation power to power. The attacks met and exploded, though the majority of the resulting concussive force was directed at Naruto, showing that Kurama's attack had indeed been stronger, and the human was blown back further until she was nearly out of the cage. Despite her disastrous earlier attempt, she again shot forward towards him.
She doesn't lack for courage, I'll give her that much.
Kurama thought. He decided to simply repeat his earlier strategy, though this time Naruto chose to dodge to the side, trying to jump over his arms. Then, with a speed one normally wouldn't expect from someone so large, Kurama managed to snap her out of the air with his paw, intending to squeeze her to death. But upon closing his paw, he immediately dropped her. It felt as if he had just tried to grab and squeeze a handful of sharp broken glass. When he looked, he saw deep cuts all over his palm. In the meantime, Naruto's hair managed to wrap itself around his wrists. Again, she used her hair to slingshot herself past his claws, finally getting at his flank. But using her hair to grab onto him like that had its downsides too, as Kurama was able to grab it and try to reel her back in. Again he was cut as her hair pulled back and bit into him like very thin, sharp and fast moving wire.
Wind chakra,
Kurama realized. That was probably what caused the cuts when he tried to squeeze her as well. The fox admitted he had never seen anybody master wind nature transformation to such an extent, save perhaps his father Hagoromo, but that man had more powerful tools in his arsenal, so probably never used it. Still, a myriad of cuts had also appeared on Naruto, showing that the techniques he used earlier to cut his palm wasn't yet fully mastered, or had some serious drawbacks. Kurama turned and swiped at her with all 9 of his tails. Each of those tails were larger than she was tall. So again, she'd have no room to dodge. So instead she braced herself for impact, and it was a testament to the power of Sage Mode that she wasn't immediately turned into paste. She managed to stuck to the tail that struck her. She then tried to climb his tail to reach his back. But Kurama had as much control over his tails as his paws. He let one of his other tails scratch over the tail Naruto was using to climb. Naruto was forced to let go or be crushed. She chose the former. But now she was airborne, which meant she couldn't dodge. Or at least that's what he assumed. Before he could blast her out of the air, she used the Windjutsu to propel her further skyward. Kurama had forgotten she could do that, as she hadn't used that trick since she escaped Gaara's sand back in the Forest of Death. This time she also used her ponytails as makeshift wings to guide her flight. Kurama's cage was incredibly large, but it did have a ceiling, and Naruto was currently upside down on top of it. Kurama started to gather power for a Tails Beast bomb, one far stronger than the one he used earlier in haste. In response, Naruto used a variant of the transformation jutsu, camouflaging herself and making her hard to see. Next, she created over 100 shadow clones fleeing in over 100 different directions. It didn't matter. Kurama's blast impacted to where she had been, and the explosion alone was enough to destroy all the clones fleeing from the measly distance they had been able to reach. It seemed Naruto had actually anticipated that result, as the real her hadn't been part of the ones trying to flee over the ceiling, but she was trying to fly away using her propelling Windjutsu. She still took damage from the indirect hit of the attack, and again it was testament to the strength of Sage Mode that she was even still alive. Naruto retained enough control to use the concussive force of the explosion to increase her speed. She flew over his head, though to Kurama's surprise she didn't try to use her hair to grab him as she flew over him. That would have been her best shot to finally have a good grip on him. When Kurama realized her goal, it was too late. Naruto hadn't been flying towards him, she'd been flying towards the gate of his cage. Kurama tried to follow, but by the time he reached her, she had slipped past the metal bars and to safety. It shook as Kurama slammed against it, but he had long since learned it wouldn't open for any force he could muster. Naruto left the mindscape immediately, and Kurama lost his chance. Disappointing, but he knew she'd be back. Humans never learned. And Naruto wasn't the type to give up so easily. In the real world, Naruto had woken up from her trance. She looked like a total mess. Several deep cuts over her skin and burn marks. They hadn't been sure how it would work, but it seemed like every injury she sustained in the mindscape would translate to her real body in some fashion. Naruto fell on her back in the grass, and incredibly, started laughing. Jiraiya appeared and held a kunai to her throat. They hadn't been sure what would happen if she died in the seal, and one of the possibilities they had discussed was the QB piloting her body like a puppet. Naruto gave the code word that they had discussed beforehand to put him at ease. "So how did it go?" he asked. "I got crushed, completely and utterly destroyed. Still no match at all," Naruto said with a massive grin. "Well, I'm glad you can see the humor in that, because I sure can't." "I said I'm still no match at all, not that I'd never be. I used to think that the QB was some demon of near limitless power, but I fought him, and I survived. I got my ass handed to me, but I survived. He's stronger than me, but I saw it, felt it, the limits of his strength, speed and power. Now that I know such a limit exists, I know what my next goal is." That wasn't the only reason that she was so pleased with this though. After obtaining Sage Mode, Naruto had felt invincible. Understandable after such a massive increase in ability. However, now she knew that this wasn't the end for her, that she still had further to go. Naruto, unlike Sakura, was a born fighter, and that she enjoyed doing so. She never felt more alive than in combat, and even better when the stakes were just her own life and not somebody else's. And her bargain had taken care of that. She was looking forward to testing herself against the QB again. She jumped up, ignoring her injuries, and with renewed enthusiasm went back to training. And scene. Okay, let's take a step back to discuss me making Naruto this powerful this early in Shippuden. And forgive me for getting a little meta. Because it does fly in the face of my philosophy when it comes to storytelling thus far, which is to make the characters as weak as the story permits them to be. If a character is too powerful, there is less tension since they can easily get out of dangerous situations. So how come this early introduction of Sage Mode? In lore, it makes sense, for Naruto's basics were already above canon Naruto's. She's already mastered Wind Nature Transformation and by now has taken it even further than canon Naruto did at the time he learned Sage Mode. So Sage Mode is kind of the next logical step. It also makes a bit more sense to me that she learned Sage Mode in the span of months that are available in the time skip, rather than the, what was it? A week maybe, that canon Naruto had time to learn Sage Mode? But those are in-lore explanations, which for me are only half of it. There is a gradient in telling a what if, where you're strictly going by what would happen. A good example would be Swakage's, currently probably the single most famous Naruto YouTuber, and his "What if Sasuke never learned the truth about Itachi" video. Or Naruto explains, "What if Sasuke Uchiha never left the Hidden Leaf Village?" Long story short, and spoilers for those two videos in 3, 2, 1. In both of those examples, the bad guys straight up win, and the world is doomed. The end. They've got no problem doing that if they see that as the most logical and likely outcome. Then there is the vast majority of other people that are doing this, like me. When we do something, yes, we want it to make sense, and that's usually how we are constantly justifying everything, and I will continue to do so. But we also just want to tell a story. Like, if we are going by the most likely outcome, there is no way Sakura should have pulled some of the stuff she pulled in this story. But screw it, I think it's cool. Of these two methods of what-if stories, neither is really better than the other, it's just a matter of preference. But then, why would I deliberately remove tension from the story by increasing the strength level of its main protagonist? Well, the answer to that would honestly be a bit of a spoiler, but suffice it to say, the earlier fights she'll engage in won't be where I'll get my narrative tension. Also, it does fit with the whole Sasuke and Naruto are both geniuses thing I've got going on. And the whole Naruto is an underdog theme that is present in canon dies a very slow, agonizing death in Shippuden anyway. Might as well embrace it and find a way to work with it. Let's just cross our fingers and hope I know what I'm doing. Honestly, I've got no idea why I'm even telling you all of this. Let's just continue with the actual plot and I promise this won't happen again. Somewhat before that first fight with the Kyuubi, Jiraiya did follow up on Naruto's request to meet with the Jinchuriki from Waterfall, and thus succeed in it. Danzo does have a reputation, but so does Jiraiya, and he can be quite charming if he wants to be. So long as Naruto comes to Waterfall instead of Fu coming to the Hidden Leaf, Shibuki, the Waterfall village leader, agrees to it. So Naruto does end up meeting Fu face to face, and they get along like a house on fire. Fu shows her around her hometown, they tell each other about their adventures, and Naruto tells Fu about her friends, mostly Sakura, though she soon drops that topic. Naruto could tell whenever she talked too long about Sakura, Fu, who was normally so exuberant, grew melancholic, though she tried to hide it. It didn't take long for Naruto to figure out that Fu, despite her friendly nature, didn't really have any true friends in her village, not counting Chome. The stigma of being a Jinchuriki was as bad in Waterfall as it was, and to an extent still is, in Konoha. And so it was understandable that Fu was a little envious whenever Naruto would go on and on about her best friend, something she didn't have. Naturally, conversation eventually turned to the Akatsuki, a great existential threat to the both of them, but there wasn't much they could do to help each other. Naruto extracted a promise to send for her in case Fu needed help, but such a message would take a while to arrive. Meanwhile, and throughout a 3 years time skip, the situation in the elemental nations as a whole continues to deteriorate. Tsunade as Hokage would have done her best to ensure none of their neighbors would want to attack the Leaf, making friends instead of enemies. That the Sand Village in canon isn't worse off in Shippuden is a testament to that. The Sand Village originally attacked the Leaf because the Leaf was taking all their clients, and so they kept losing funding. The only way this problem would have been solved was if Tsunade makes an effort to solve it. Danzo, on the other hand, doesn't really believe in the concept of friends. He believes in the Leaf Village, enemies of the Leaf Village, and not yet enemies of the Leaf Village. He will continue to try and take clients from the sand on top of other subversive actions. Seeing that this tactic works, he'd even try the same with the other neighbors, sometimes even lowering the price of their ninja to hopefully outcompete the other villages. This would in turn force them to respond, and hostilities would slowly increase over the 3 years time skip, starting with simply chasing away, to capturing, to killing foreign shinobi that trespassed on their territory, and ultimately sabotaging the other nations, effectively creating problems that would require a ninja response, and then ambushing that response. The Chunin exams, which was supposed to be a sign of cooperation between the villages, got cancelled. Nobody trusting anybody else to hold it in their village. Considering that some considered the Chunin exams to be a substitute for war, its continuous cancellation was a big sign of what was to come. The Fire Daimyo would, upon noticing the signs, try to command Danzo to stop all this. But this just means that he'll try to be sneaky about it all. Danzo only respects the Fire Lord's authority as far as he has to. Kind of like he only respected Hiruzen's authority as far as he was forced to. All of this simply reinforces both Nagato and Obito's belief that the world is fucked and they need to fix it with their respective plans. Speaking of the Akatsuki, we do know that even before Shippuden started, or in other words, before the capture of Gaara, 2 other Jinchurikis got captured. While this isn't 100% confirmed, I think Han and Fu were those 2. So thanks to the established connection between Naruto and Fu, Danzo gets a letter on his desk asking him for help tracking down the missing waterfall Jinchuriki. Now, Danzo fully believes war is coming. Traditionally, in order to minimize the damage to their own territory, the great villages avoided fighting on their own soil, which resulted in most of the fighting taking place in the smaller border nations, like Rain. Danzo knows that Rain is pretty much Akatsuki headquarters, so he won't be able to use it as a battleground. This means he needs to look for a different locale, so Weakened Waterfall serves his interest just fine. Besides, Danzo didn't like how Naruto was starting to get chummy with foreign ninja. And so, using a simple fire release cantrip, he burns the letter, letting Fu's only hope of rescue turn into ashes on the wind. He'd also need to make sure that the messenger who had delivered this letter didn't talk, but that shouldn't be too hard to pin on the Akatsuki. They had a vested interest in that letter not being delivered after all. Naruto and Fu had exchanged frequent letters during the time skip, and so at one point, those letters simply stopped coming for Naruto. She correctly guessed what had happened. Jiraiya allowed Naruto to visit Sakura, so she could help her with the grief. Beyond the sadness of losing a friend, there was also fear. To Naruto, Fu's disappearance felt like a noose tightening around her neck, since it meant that the Akatsuki had finally begun to move. Danzo continued to receive the occasional report from Itachi, so he knew this too. And he also knew who their next target was going to be. But before that, we've got Naruto and Sakura officially returning to the Leaf Village. It's bigger than I remember, Sakura remarked. Since she had refused her remedial lessons, she hadn't visited the place as often as Naruto. This was also the first time she had seen Danzo's face on the Hokage monument. It hadn't finished the last time she was here. Say what you want about Danzo, he's done a good job of rebuilding the place, Naruto said. It now looks even more like a fortress city. Now let's go and find and meet everybody. And they went and did exactly that. As they traveled about the place, they noticed 2 things. 1. The Leaf Village indeed looked a lot more prosperous than they remembered ever seeing it. Better than before the Sands invasion, if memory served. More stores, the destroyed buildings had been replaced by larger ones. 2nd, there was a sort of nervous tension throughout the populace, especially the shinobi, another sign of the increasing hostility between the villages. They could all sense a war was coming, and it was only a matter of when at this point. But enough doom and gloom. It wasn't long into their tour of Konoha when Naruto was ambushed and bulldozed over by 100 pounds of slobbering dog. While Naruto had visited Konoha on occasion, it was always clandestine, so this was the first time she had seen Kiba and Akamaru in quite some time. For Akamaru, being a dog, it had seemed even longer since he had seen the alpha female human that had thought him adorable, and had always been willing to give him scratches. I missed you too, Akamaru. Please stop that! Naruto tried to gently push Akamaru away to stop him from licking her face. Akamaru had become quite strong, however, and he knew how to keep a human pinned, and Naruto wasn't willing to hurt him. Kiba! A little help, please? You're on your own, Naruto. Should have visited more, and this wouldn't have happened. Kiba was smiling though, indicating that he didn't mean anything by it. Sakura also found the situation way too amusing to step in. After Naruto's face had been thoroughly washed with dog drool, she was finally allowed to stand up again. Has our friendship truly faded so much that you betray me to this fate so readily? Woe is me! Woe! Woe, I say! Oh, quit being such a drama queen, Kiba said and tossed her a towel. He had kind of expected this to happen. Glad to have you back. Things haven't been the same ever since you left. I am sorry, but I'm also kind of glad I was so missed. Since I missed you too. Jiraiya... well, he's not bad company per se, but he is a shameless old man. I can only imagine. Tsunade has told me stories. Peeping on bathhouses. Really, what kind of example does that set? Sakura complained. Naruto at that point was trying to look very innocent, and looked for another topic. Kiba, do you know where I can find Kakashi? I've brought him a present. He tends to train at predictable times of the day. I can bring you to him later. Good. I've brought him a new copy of the latest entry of the Makeout series. Hasn't even been officially released yet, so that should cheer him up, Naruto said. And it's nice to see you again, Kiba. Yeah, you too. You've both grown up, he said, while, with some effort, managed to not look at Naruto's chest area. Because she had that now. Sakura still looked kinda flat to him. And he knew he'd never mention any of that so long as he wanted to keep breathing. You definitely look a bit older, Naruto said. Listen, we do need to go and meet several other people before informing the Hokage of our arrival. Not that there was a chance he didn't already know, but if he needed them immediately, he could just summon them. And I know that if we really started catching up, we'd be here the rest of the day. But we will make time, I swear. Then it's a date, Kiba said triumphantly. Sakura will be there too, Naruto was quick to point out. Kiba's grin only widened. Even better. Sakura and Naruto made some disgusted ugh sounds, but both of them were still smiling. Just like with Kiba, they had to cut down all their meetings with old friends and family short. Sakura made sure they never stayed with any singular person or group for longer than about half an hour. Not even Sakura's own parents, so as to make room for everyone. Another person Naruto was glad to see again, and worthy of note, was the surrogate little brother Konohamaru. Naruto-ne-chan! He yelled as he ran towards them, his two best friends in tow. Konohamaru stopped in front of him, but Naruto closed the rest of the distance to envelop him in a hug. They exchanged the customary, happy to see you again, before Naruto asked, what are you wearing? Impressed? Konohamaru asked, pointing at his leaf headband. I'm a bona fide ninja myself now. Congratulations, Naruto said. But I was actually talking about, well, everything else. Konohamaru, as well as his two friends, were dressed in identical dirty green jackets. Oh, it's the new standard uniform. It's mandatory, even for Genin. It's designed for maximum utility in the field, the other male member of the squad, Udon, said. Lord Danzo isn't a fan of individualism, Kiba said, too softly for the Genin to hear. I suppose if it will help keep them safe, Naruto mumbled. Yeah, I'm a bit sad about not being allowed to pick my own cool outfit, but I know it will help in the field. Not that we need it, but every little bit helps with the war starting soon. Are things truly so desperate? Sakura asked. Everyone is talking about it, Konohamaru said before enthusiastically bumping his fist into the air. But don't worry, I'm ready to fight and die on Konoha's behalf. His two friends echoed the sentiment with a yeah. Naruko's smile grew noticeably strained. Even Kiba noticed it. Sakura was the one who ended up doing the customary goodbyes and see you laters. They waited to see anyone else until Naruko managed to look slightly less disturbed. The next place they went to was the Yamanaka flower shop. Naruko and Sakura weren't particularly close to Inuichi and his wife. They had always just been the parents of their best friend. But still, they knew them and vice versa. So they felt they should at least say hi. Besides, Kiba brought up the suggestion, and they had no reason to refuse. He'd had a slightly odd expression as he did so, which only Sakura noticed as Naruko was still a bit out of it after Konohamaru. They found Inuichi sitting at the counter, looking much as they remembered him. Ah, I see you returned. Let me call Noriko real quick. She'd want to see you too, and I think she might bring a surprise. Noriko was the name of Ino's mother's voice actress. We didn't get a name for the character, so it will serve. The so-named Noriko returned, and both Naruko and Sakura's breath caught in their throats at the small toddler she was leading by the hand. The light blonde hair marked her as a likely Yamanaka. Is that? Naruko whispered. She felt like she was being assaulted by over a dozen different emotions and half again as many memories. Her name is Fumino Yamanaka, Noriko said. We were all deeply wounded by what happened, but we must continue on. Sakura turned to Kiba. You knew. I thought it might surprise you. That it certainly did, Sakura thought, and poked Naruko in the ribs to snap her out of her trance. She had been looking at Fumino with such intensity she was starting to scare the small child. I'm sorry, Naruko said, moving to eye level with the child. You just reminded me of your older sister is all. Fumino was still too nervous around her, and looked to her mother for reassurance. That does happen a lot, she said. You're welcome to visit, but I need you to try and treat her as her own person and not the second coming of Ino. That wouldn't be fun for her. I know, it's just, it's a bit much for me so suddenly. Naruko stood up. She had to leave soon or she'd know she'd break down crying. Though they hadn't seen each other often these last 3 years except during the rare holiday or birthdays, Sakura could still read Naruko like a book. And honestly, she needed some time too. So she gently guided them out of the shop after promising they'd visit later. Should I have warned you guys? Kiba asked. I was just trying to cheer you up. No, this was wonderful. Thank you. But I want to go and visit Ichiraku's now, Naruko said. She needed some comfort food. Later in the day, after she'd calmed down, Naruko decided it was time to finally go give Kakashi his present. Kiba brought them to one of Konoha's training grounds. Hey Kakashi-san, we're back and we've got a present for you. For me? Aw, you shouldn't have. And Naruko presented the newest addition to the Makeout series, Icha Icha Boy Island. Kakashi looked at the book suspiciously. Is it another one of those entries into the series? I have no idea what you mean. Ever since you left with Jiraiya, his books have been having some interesting new features. I can't help but be suspicious. Naruko laughed nervously. Again, I have no idea what you're talking about. Sakura grabbed Naruko's shoulder, hard. Naruko, what don't you want us to know? Well, in order to stop me from getting in the way of his spying, he decided to recruit me instead. I wouldn't complain about his research, and in return I was allowed to do my own investigations into the male sections of the bathhouses. He's also been letting me proofread and occasionally co-author his books. So it was you! Kakashi yelled at her. You monster! These books were my safe space! I don't need to read a half-page description of how well-toned the skin of the male lead is, or his muscles, or his angular features. I admit, Jiraiya himself was skeptical, but it has really helped him expand to a new audience. Once the money started flowing, he quickly came around to my way of thinking, Naruto said smugly. Kakashi continued to look at her in pain and misery. Naruto, I am so disappointed in you, I don't think words can properly convey it, Sakura says. She grabbed Naruto by her ear and pulled her into the forest. Kiba winced at Naruto's whimpers of terror. Sakura only agreed to stop tormenting her after yes, Naruto promised that she'd stop spying on men in private areas. And no, she wouldn't allow Jiraiya to continue invading women's privacy. And yes, Naruto would definitely be getting Sakura a copy of that latest book. Now, back to more serious stuff. I think Danzo would want to see proof of how far Naruto and Sakura have come, and so an exhibition match is in order. Kind of like how it was in canon with Sakura plus Naruto against Kakashi. Except instead of Kakashi, it's Jiraiya and Tsunade. Jiraiya had promised to make the girl stronger than himself, so it was only appropriate. There is no such thing as with the bells, it's just a brawl. While Sakura isn't quite the equal of Tsunade, Perfect Sage Naruto was more than the equal of Imperfect Sage Jiraiya. Especially since in a battle between two Toad summoners, the Toads didn't like to get involved. No infighting, even for a spar. And Jiraiya relies much more strongly on the summons than Naruto does. Naruto's only handicap is that her strongest jutsu, the Wind Rush and Shuriken, is almost guaranteed to kill her opponent if it hits, so she's not going to use it here. I see the Wind Rush and Shuriken as being a match for any tailed beast bomb that's fired by any of the lesser tailed beasts, meaning anything but the 9 tails or the 10 tails. But even Naruto's regular wind jutsus were no joke. And then there is her Frog Kumite, which she took a bit farther than its canon application. Frog Kumite, for those that don't know, creates an aura of Senjutsu enhanced chakra around the user, which is invisible to anyone that hasn't also trained in Senjutsu. This can then be used to extend the range of melee attacks. We most often remember this from when Naruto punched one of the Paths of Pain with it. Naruto decided to expand on that, not just using it for offensive purposes but defensive as well by infusing the aura with her wind chakra. When Tsunade managed to get in close and tried to engage in close quarters combat, her arms and hands came away bloodied from what looked like hundreds of knife cuts. When Naruto used that technique, nobody could attack her in close quarters combat without taking damage in turn. It was a technique that Naruto had specifically designed to counter the Masked Man's Kamui, which she had seen utilized in Minato's memory. One of Kamui's drawbacks was that you couldn't phase through everything and attack at the same time. If the Masked Man wanted to attack her, he'd have to become solid for at least a small moment. And if he did that, Naruto's technique would hopefully shred his arms to pieces. That was Naruto's hope anyway. This was also the technique that she used to get out of Tsukubi's grip in that earlier scene and injure the fox's hands. Naruto was effectively taking her wind transformation technique as far as the Raikage was taking lightning release. Except for a chakra cloak that boosts speed, Sage Naruto gets one that counterattacks. As for Sakura, well, she's not anywhere close to the level of destructive power that Sage Naruto has available. So she mostly stayed back and used her time-slowing self-hypnosis technique to observe their opponents, reading their tactics, and made sure that they didn't catch them off guard. Tsunade and Jiraiya can't do much in that early stage against Sage Naruto. Of course, Sage Mode has a time limit, so eventually we do get base Naruto and Sakura versus their teachers, with Jiraiya also being back to base form. And that's somewhat more even. Especially since, as mentioned, Sakura isn't a match for Tsunade yet, even without Tsunade using the Byakugo seal. Naruto could have ended the fight before her time limit ran out, but this was a practice fight, and so it was important to see how she did without her greatest weapon. Here, Sakura gets to shine a bit more, since if she pulled out all of her tricks, including the primary Lotus, self-hypnosis, and super strength, She was the second best close-range fighter there after Tsunade. Better than both Jiraiya and Naruto. Again, while both were in base. And even against Tsunade, Sakura could hold her own for at least a decent chunk of time before being overwhelmed. Long enough for Naruto to force Tsunade to retreat from her razor-sharp hair. But on the other hand, Sakura has the worst stamina out of everyone there. Naruto, as everyone there knows, has the most stamina out of the four. So for the Naruto/Sakura team to last, Naruto has to carry most of the weight whenever possible, with Sakura only stepping in when needed with her fist or genjutsu to create distractions. Naruto's windjutsus and her razor-sharp hair were their main method of offense. For Naruto and Sakura it was all very nostalgic. Naruto was the frontline bulldozer and Sakura was a support that was always there in case a little edge was needed. This fight is a slogfest that lasts a decent chunk of time. Tsunade could heal any injuries their team sustained, and the same was true for Sakura's medical skills combined with Naruto's own healing factor. It eventually ends in a draw, when Sakura's stamina fails and Naruto decides that the best tactical choice would be to withdraw. Having learned to use her windjutsus for a very clumsy form of flight, she grabs her friend and blasted off. Her method of flight required the use of hand seals for the jutsu, her mouth to blow the wind to propel herself, and her hair for better steering. And even then it was difficult to see where she was going unless she had the superior senses of Sage Mode. She couldn't fly and fight at the same time, which irked Naruto to be honest. Her element was wind, there had to be a better way than this. Still, everyone agreed that if the situation was real, she would have gotten away. And afterwards, she could have recharged her Sage Mode in peace, and come back for a round 2 that she'd probably win. Later, in the Hokage's office.
It seems like you both did a good job, Danzo complimented. I didn't do it for you, Jiraiya said.
Must you two be at such odds? Koharu said. Both of the Hokage's advisors were present. You're both on the same side, and you even have the same student.
It's quite alright, Danzo said. But I admit, there is a second reason I called you here. After all suspicions about Rain, I've tried very hard to get some information on that village. Me too, but the border is closed and what few do have permission to visit are kept under constant surveillance. Yes, but Rain Ninja do on rare occasion leave the border. We captured one of them and managed to interrogate him, Danzo lied. It was an excuse to relay some information that Itachi gave him. They have a new leader they call Pain. Oh god if they are feeling dramatic. But what's really interesting is that his primary enforcer and messenger is a person they call Angel. A woman who uses paper-based jutsu of all things, has blue hair and commonly wears a flower ornament. Jiraiya frowned at that description. Does that sound familiar? If this is the same woman you once trained, you should be able to give Uzumaki intel on how to defeat her, if she ever runs into her. Conan, a part of the Akatsuki. Impossible. We don't know for sure, Tsunade tried to reassure him. No, we don't, and I have to be. You said she was in the Hidden Rain Village, correct? Yes, but you can't go. It's too dangerous. She was my student, and so everything she does is partly my responsibility. I've got to at least try and talk to her. And if I can't reason with her, I've got to know why. Besides, I plan to head to the Rain Village to investigate myself eventually. But I've got nothing out of that place hurts my pride as an intelligence gatherer. Danzo continued to try and dissuade Jiraiya, but with no success. Eventually, Tsunade volunteered to go with him as backup. Jiraiya tried to dissuade her, but Tsunade insisted, saying she'd follow him to Rain whether he wanted her to or not. This, as far as Danzo was concerned, couldn't have gone any better. Either Jiraiya would successfully reason with his old students and so cause division within the Akatsuki, or they'd fight and either the Akatsuki would lose some powerful members, or Jiraiya and Tsunade would die, and that would also be good for him. Danzo considered both Sannin Shinobi had been broken by the horrors of the last war in one way or another. As powerful as they wouldn't help with the war to come. And Jiraiya was too much of a bad influence on Naruto Uzumaki. The girl was more important than they knew. Besides being one of, if not the most important military asset of the village, Danzo was also considering her as a possible candidate for the position of Hokage. Danzo knew that he was an old man who only had a few more decades left in him. Probably less. Uzumaki was powerful and had a natural charisma, but she was still too naive. She'd need to be brought closer to his way of thinking before he'd consider her as a successor, and he knew that Jiraiya would stand in the way of that. And if Jiraiya died during this mission, Danzo could now claim that he, in front of witnesses, had tried to dissuade the Toads from this dangerous course of action. Of course, Danzo knew that his objections would only make Jiraiya even more likely to go. Tsunade wasn't even an official Konoha ninja anymore. She'd passed all of her skills on to Sakura Haruno, so the old slug princess was of no further use to the Leaf. Danzo got the impression that Sakura Haruno wasn't all that loyal to him and the Leaf either, but she was at least loyal to Naruto. So long as Naruto towed the line, the Leaf would have access to Sakura's medical skills. Of course, there was always the chance that nothing would happen. Jiraiya would talk to his old students, fail, and then they'd escape. But nothing was ever certain. At least they might get her some useful intel. Next, after the Sannin left, Danzo invited Naruto and Sakura into his office. Welcome back. I'm sure that our village is a lot safer now that you're officially back. Thank you. It's been a joy catching up to old friends, though I wish more of them were here. Many ninja teams were positioned at the border, looking for any signs of hostility. This included Team 8 with Choji, Shikamaru and Shino. Asuma also wasn't here. But that can be helped. Now we've got several orders of business. The first is your mastery of the Kyuubi. I've given you extra time as you asked, but the deadline has passed. So now the question. Are you in control of the Kyuubi? I am, Naruto lied. But I won't need him. My other powers are sufficient. I can beat Jiraiya if I have to now. I doubt there are that many ninjas in the world that can stand up to me, even other Jinchuriki. Be as it may, I want you to demonstrate to me your mastery of the Kyuubi. Right here and now. 2 taels worth of power will suffice for now. Shit! Naruto thought, and focused her thoughts inward, towards her tenant. I hope you're paying attention and know what's at stake here. She reached for the Kyuubi's power, and for the first time since her fight with Gaara, it leapt to her command. A cloak of chakra appeared around her and 1 then 2 tails sprung from it. As her own strength and will had increased, she had a lot easier time controlling it. Or maybe it was just the Kyuubi being less obstinate here. She didn't know. Only now, to keep up your charade. I won't aid you in any real combat. I don't know how long I can keep pretending. Would you rather be brainwashed than throw me a bone now and then? Yes! If you want my power, you'd have to rip it from my cold, hypnotized claws. Suddenly, the cloaked form felt a lot harder to control and more painful to maintain. That's enough of a demonstration, Danzo said, and Naruto gratefully allowed the power to recede. Now to our second order of business. Do you know why your heritage as the daughter of the 4th Hokage was kept a secret? He had enemies. Enemies that I'd inherit, and I'd be too weak to defend myself against. Indeed, but that is no longer true. With your permission, I'd like to spread the word as to your heritage. It will give everybody a boost to morale. A new champion to replace the one we lost years ago. If my guess is correct, it will overshadow any kind of stigma being the Kyuubi's Jinchuriki gets you. With this, and your new powers, you'd be loved and admired by all. That was the original motivation for when she'd still held the dream of becoming Hokage. She had friends now, so that desire wasn't as strong as it once was. Still, it remained a quiet wish of hers. To have everyone, not just a select few, acknowledge her for whom she was, not for what she held. But always when she pictures herself achieving that wish, it was always because of something she did to change their minds, not because she was riding her father's coattails. Still, if it gave people hope, she figured it would be selfish to refuse. Go ahead, she said. Danzo nodded. Next, I promised you that your promotion to Chunin would be waiting for you after you returned.
And I promised I'd be worthy of it by that time, Naruto said. I don't know if I am, but I'll do my best, Hokage-sama. Good. And he presented her a Chunin uniform, which Naruto took but had no intention of ever wearing over her chosen outfits. Danzo's preference towards standardized uniforms be damned. Truthfully, even the rank of Chunin is too low for what you're supposed to represent. But promoting you to Jonin without you ever having led a mission before would stink too much of favoritism. Hence our next and last order of business. I've got an important mission for you that you will lead personally. Perform well and I'll be able to promote you even further. And from there, Danzo intended to offer her a sort of internship as his assistant when she wasn't out in the field. This was in order for her to learn the workings of the Hokage's office, so she'd be as prepared as possible to take the hat after him, and so that Danzo would be able to keep her close so as to get the most influence over her. Unlike Sakura, Naruto did care a lot about her career as a ninja, so this was an opportunity she'd likely welcome. I'm ready to prove myself. An interesting piece of information reached our ears regarding the Akatsuki's movements. We know their next target. They are going after the Kazekage, Gaara of the desert. Naruto's eyes narrowed. I'd be happy to help any other Jinchuriki against the Akatsuki, except that one. Let me finish. Regardless of your feelings on Gaara, we know where the Akatsuki will strike, and so where they will be. This will be a chance for you to hunt a few of them before they hunt you. Beyond that, we must keep the One-Tails out of the hands of the Akatsuki, and there is more than one way to do that. We have received offers to mend the poor relations between our villages from the sand. You will use that as an excuse to go there and offer your assistance. Your real goal, however, will be to assassinate the Kazekage. And that's the end of chapter 32. Naik's out.